Hello, everyone. We are back for our Canada Day edition of the Real Estate Roundtable. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, John Pasalis of Realosophy Realty, here with me in Toronto. Hi, John.
Hello again.
And Steve out in Vancouver. How are you doing, Steve? Steve Saretsky is with Oakwin Realty in Vancouver.
Appreciate the plug. No, I'm yeah, doing well. Doing well. Back to dog days of summer, so it'll be interesting to sort of see how things shape up.
Oh, dog days of summer. If my hair looks bigger than normal, it's because I've entered Toronto August in July.
You
So
guys
this
had like
is
a
my
heat wave
hair
there,
right
didn't
now.
you? Is there a heat
Uh,
wave in Toronto still?
Yeah, it was hot. It's hot. I
Very
I
hot.
like it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the fireworks. You guys?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it was good. Just it's kind of a weird, like, Monday was like not a holiday, but Tuesday was.
I know.
So
Yeah, it
I
was
think
so weird.
everybody just extended, right?
I
Totally.
feel like we're in a harsher society. I feel like there was a time where everyone knew we wouldn't come to work on Monday, but times have changed. But yeah, it was really nice to see fireworks. We saw them going off all around the city this time. I think people maybe spent a few more taxpayer dollars on those celebrations this year. But that contrasts, of course, with a lot of uncertainty. So let's get back to real estate markets in Toronto and Vancouver. Who wants to start about what the month has looked like?
John, go ahead.
Sure. The market's still sluggish in Toronto. I mean, when we look at the stats year over year, sales are pretty much the same level as last year. So we've been down year over year the past few months because the start of 2024 was a bit busy. It was a bit kind of a little bit more aggressive, and then things slowed down in the second half. So now we're kind of where we were last year, but prices are down maybe 4%, 5%. Sales are the same. New listings are up a little bit. So kind of pretty much the same on the ground. It's still pretty quiet. I mean, I think I've talked about these trends that, even the low rise market is slower. In the first few months of the year, low rise, meaning semis detached rows, like, I mean, they were pretty competitive in central Toronto, downtown, the first 3, 4 months of the year. Now they're a lot quieter. I mean, I had a couple clients bidding last week, nice properties, kind of downtown prime areas, both homes priced low. They only got a couple of offers, so it wasn't overly competitive. I mean, and the funny thing is, one of our clients who bought one of the homes last week in the beach, she sent me an article of when this home last sold, uh, close to the peak of the market, and it was quite interesting. So we bought a bit less than what they paid for, but the article back then, it just shows like a very different sentiment. There's like a Globe article of when this home last sold, and it was just talking about the chaos and hundreds of people visited and all of these offers and all this competition, all this enthusiasm, all this excitement, multiple offers, right? And so much over asking. And then, you fast forward to today, they were lucky to get that second bid, and less than what they were hoping and were expecting to get. So, obviously very different market sentiments today. So I'd say, yeah, the market's kind of still sluggish. I don't think it's gonna, rebound this summer. I think the summer is usually pretty slow time, but we'll see what the fall's like.
All right, Steve in Vancouver.
Yeah, it's kind of a similar dynamic as it always tends to be between Vancouver and Toronto. You look at home sales for Greater Vancouver for the month of June was the second fewest in 20 years. So the worst year was actually so far, anyways, it's been June of 2019.
Mm.
So again, it's funny because you go back to June 2019, I don't recall it ever being like that slow. I mean, it was definitely slow, but you look at where sales are today and they're just slightly higher than June of 2019. So effectively outside of that year was a 20-year low. Inventory, standing inventory levels on the resale market are the highest they've been since 2014. So yeah, I mean that's kind of the tell all. And if you look at the number of new listings second highest, 6,300 listings in the month of June, second highest to June of 2008. But it's funny because if you break that out, and this is what we've kind of been emphasizing on the show for many, many months now, is if you sort of look at this on a segment basis, new listings in the condo space were at all-time record highs, far, surpassing even 2008. And then if you look at what's happening in the single family market, Still actually well below the 20-year average. So again, it kind of shows you that the buildup in inventory is heavily concentrated in the condo market. And again, so just to reemphasize what's happening in these markets like Vancouver and Toronto is specifically in Vancouver is you don't really build new single family houses. There's no like new big plot of land that you're discovering and going and building, 500 new houses on. Every single year the housing stock is actually contracting. And so what we're seeing is, of course, the buildup in inventory is in the condo space. And that's obviously where most of the investors have played, right? If you look at where the biggest weakness in the market is today, it's in that investor style condo. As the investors have sort of fled the market, that's where you've seen the increase in new listings, the buildup in inventory, and I think you're seeing the most pressure on pricing in that segment.
Yeah, I think that's fair, right, John? There's a lot of micro condos coming onto the market, but not a
Yeah.
lot of interest.
Yeah, very similar. Yeah, it's a tough market for the small condos in Toronto. Rents are soft. No one's buying them. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone wanted to buy them when prices are going up 10% per year, but no one wants to buy them when prices are flat for 4 years. So, yeah, that market's pretty much dried up.
And end users, it will be interesting to see if they ever want to live in them.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be some. I think prices will have to soften a little bit for them
Mhm.
to attract even more end users because they're still pretty expensive. I mean, people are looking what they can rent those same units for, and many are thinking, I'll just rent.
How pervasive is like these micro condos in the GTA? Like I don't know. I don't like in Vancouver, yeah, we have a lot of small condos, but it depends what you define as small. Like a lot of one bedrooms are call it 600-ish square feet. I don't know if I'd call it a micro condo.
So I think the market's just evolved over the past 15 years. So it's not like these small condos are the dominant in the entire stock, but
Mhm.
they've probably been the key driver like over the past, say, 5 years, right?
What do you look at for a square foot basis? Are you like 475 square feet? Are you 520
500,
square
I,
feet?
I
Yeah,
think, right,
five to
John?
six. Like a lot of
Yeah.
newer buildings, like the average square footage is then like in the low to mid 600s, like in a
Yeah.
lot of these high rises,
And the
right?
new stuff.
In the new stuff, yes. Not
Okay.
like stuff built 10 years ago,
Yeah.
right? But in a
Okay.
lot of new buildings, you'll see average square footage in the building is 650 square feet, which means that you have a lot of units that are under 600, obviously, right?
Mhm.
Does that include two bedrooms as well?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the average in the whole building. So including two bedrooms, including the
Oh.
small ones, the average square footage in the whole building is, in the sixes for a lot of these new builds, right?
So if
So
I had to
a lot lower average.
Yeah,
Yeah, so if I
exactly.
had to speculate on like most, let's say, new construction in the greater Vancouver area, and this is a bit broad strokes, but I'd say like, your typical one bedroom in a new development might be like, call it 580 square feet. A two bedroom would be like 820 square feet. So like that would be sort of the norm, I would say today. And again, I'm not sure if that quantifies as like a micro dog crate condo, but they're small units, obviously.
Hmm.
Actually, I think my brother was in one in Olympic Village in Vancouver.
Mhm.
It was small. I think the problem right now is for end users. Do you take a gamble on something that two people cannot live in? And at some of these prices, how many people can go in there as a single person now?
Hmm.
Well, I almost want to add to that point as we're on this conversation, but like I think what we've seen is not only has the investor like kind of disappeared from the market, which is obviously, the investor was obviously a pretty large buyer of, let's say, a one bedroom 580 square feet, right? I mean, that's where you can sort of try to make the math work. In these one bedrooms that might rent for, call it 2,600 a month. You buy it for 600,000 or 620,000. But I've also think that what we've seen is like just sort of post pandemic is just more people working from home still, even like hybrid style, and just wanting like that extra den or that extra sort of office area
Oh yeah,
that, if
two
they're going to be working
people,
from,
that means everything.
yeah, and
Like,
if you're working from
yeah,
home, let's say 3 days a week,
yeah,
I just think there's been a natural shift as well to like looking for larger product.
Yeah.
yeah.
And that becomes,
So
as Urmi said, I think it becomes a bigger issue if you have two people living in that 550 square foot condo,
yeah,
right?
what I'm finding is anecdotally, I think that age group is aging out of them. So like, fine, you're alone, you pay rent for a few years. Do you really want to buy this condo when you're dating? There might be someone moving in. It's tough, and like, not to even mention the amount of pets that were adopted, it seems, during COVID. So you're putting two people and a pet in there.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't know. I just anecdotally, I'm hearing from people just hesitation
Mhm.
around buying a unit that small
Because
and
you
just
think you might outgrow it in 3 to 4 years, and if there's
Yeah.
not
yeah,
enough,
not even like,
Yeah.
yes, like next
well,
year, the year after, and for
yeah,
the
but
reasons you said.
even if it's 3 to 4 years, is
Yeah,
there enough price appreciation there
right.
that you can roll out? Like, because you not only the price appreciation, it has to be enough appreciation to cover the taxes and the realtor fees and lawyer fees on the exit.
Yeah.
So like it has to go up. It's got to go up a decent amount to sort of, you know, break even and exit into something larger.
Mhm.
I think that's anecdotally, I am hearing people just wanting a bit of a price drop on the bigger units. So I don't know if that unsticks the market. But let's move to our next topic, which is the overall trade in economics. Like, I know the real estate industry would like to say, well, it's just really hot in Toronto. Everyone went to the cottage early, and that's why it's dead.
Mhm.
But is that the truth? I mean, we've heard a bit of a bumpy now Canadian US evolution in our trade talks. We were feeling positive. We have a new prime minister, but now it seems like, okay, we've rescinded a certain measure that was important. What is the US going to do? It seems like once in a while, the Trump administration still rears its head to attack Canada. Do you think that's still feeding into the overall uncertainty?
I think so. I think it's a huge factor. I think a lot of the trade and economic uncertainty. So people see both, right? Like the economy's obviously softening. We're hearing about job losses, construction industry cutting jobs, bankers cutting jobs. Like a lot of sectors are cutting jobs right now. And you combine that with the economic uncertainty. I think, yeah, that's why we're in the Toronto area, like 30-year low in detached home sales. Like that's not normal, right? And I think it's all of this uncertainty. And I do wonder like how it plays out. This is I think the thing when these slowdowns are, I mean, at least from my perspective, a lot part of it is driven by market sentiment, and we've talked about this on the show. End
Mhm.
of last year, the sentiment was actually positive, like at least on the ground. People were like, I got to get in now because the market's going to rebound in the spring. I want to take advantage of the slow market. And then all of a sudden, sentiment shifted. So, if we get a trade deal with the US, like my instinct is Canada's not going to sign anything unless there's something that says, Trump just can't wake up 2 weeks from now and decide to cancel it again and introduce like there's got to be some certainty, right? And if we get a trade deal, does this sort of change the sentiment that people feel a little bit more optimistic? And again, I don't mean the market's going to rally 10%, but do you just see people jump back in? And I think it's very possible, if we get some sort of, clarity on US trade and what that is, like I wouldn't be surprised, especially for low-rise homes. I wouldn't be surprised if demand slightly picks up again.
What's the likelihood? I mean, as you guys know, I used to work in trade long, long time ago. It's possible they'll make a deal that they think they could renege on, the Americans. But right now it's early strikes. Like, we're seeing this with the UK, with Starmer. Like, a lot of people are just making these early deals and then trying to ride the waves. Is that enough to convince Canadians? What are you hearing, Steve?
Oh, I mean, I don't know about that. I think it's inevitable. There's going to be like a deal that gets struck because there's really no other option. So I think that to John's point, the sentiment towards the end of last year was actually, yeah, it was quite positive, right? Like we're seeing entry level houses going into multiple offers, and people were optimistic about the outlook for 2025. I'm not sure if I necessarily shared all that view, but clearly the market took a dramatic shift when the tariff stuff was being sort of unveiled early days, and I just don't think it's recovered since then. I actually kind of wonder too, like John, like how much of like people are obviously worried about like the volatility in the markets, the uncertainty about their job prospects, specifically with the tariff stuff, but also kind of wonder how much of it is like AI driven too, which is like, hey, is my job going to get replaced I mean, obviously we're hearing all these tech companies are saying, listen, we're not hiring anymore. Like we're trying to take advantage of AI and ramp up productivity and keep our labor force down. So I kind of wonder like how much of that just plays into the psyche. Because at the end of the day, like buying residential housing is predominantly like sentiment, it's emotional. You're dealing with families. It's like, yeah, I mean, John, I mean, obviously being in the business, I feel like a lot of the times I'm like a marriage counselor, right? You're dealing
Big
with
time.
the husband and the wife and the kids, and they want to go to this school. And so like a lot of it is just emotion driven, right? And so when you go to like an open house and you see, 20 pairs of shoes out front of the door, like people just get like charged up and like, okay, I got to do this. I don't want to get outbid. And I think when they start seeing like open houses are slow and people are negative and their neighbors telling them not to buy, their uncles telling them they should wait, people just sort of follow the leader and they just get stuck. And I think that's kind of where we are today. So I think again, I think obviously if you get a trade deal done, I think that should improve sentiment that you have to see an uptick in activity. You have what 20, call it 20-year lows in home sales in Greater Vancouver, Greater Toronto, depending on the month. And so like that's just not a sustainable level of demand. Demand will increase, but the other issue is you still have a lot of inventory that you have to work through. So I don't see pricing moving to the upside, this year.
And very good insight about the structural change in the employment market too. I
Mhm.
think there is a lot of worry about that. It's almost a hidden storyline
Yeah.
because we're
Yeah. I
being
think
so
everybody's trying to
distracted.
like figure out how to use it to sort
Mhm.
of, increase revenues and keep costs down. Right. So I think it's certainly not my wheelhouse of expertise, but it's interesting hearing a lot of these like, big tech companies coming out and yeah, I think the writing's on the wall.
I have friends that work in the AI space, and they're saying I'm basically writing the code to get rid of myself.
Yeah.
So there's definitely people that are seeing this on the front lines. And I think you're right. There might be a big structural shift also happening underneath. So we'll have to see that. Let's move on to maybe why CMHC, our National Housing Agency, seems to have given up on housing affordability. Is this why? So CMHC in their latest report indicated that they have given up on making housing affordable in Canada's biggest cities, including Toronto and Vancouver. Move Smartly is reporting this because their previous goal in their previous report was to ensure housing costs are no more than 30% of average household incomes before taxes. Now, the latest report, CMHC hopes to double completions only to get those numbers back down to 2019 levels when home costs were 59% of income in Toronto and 71% of income in Vancouver. That's average household income. So they moved the goalposts big time. What is going on?
Steve.
Oh God. I mean, John and I have always laughed about this. I think more off the record, but you look at the CMHC like housing affordability, right? And I think it's like, oh, if we add whatever millions of units to the housing supply over the next 5, 6, 7 years, then we'll get to like these 2004 affordability levels or whatever. But that basically implies that you're going to continue to add all of the supply as home prices are declining. And that, basically would require home prices to drop like 40, 50% in many cases. And there's just no way. I mean, there's just like it's like you can sit there in your back office and write these reports, but on the ground, in reality, there's no big commercial bank that's going to be lending money to a developer in an environment where home prices are actively dropping every single year. Most of these developers, especially your small to medium sized developers, are often relying on limited partners, right, to bring in equity, basically bring in essentially private capital to fund these developments. And so what's your pitch to this money? Hey, come invest with us, and you know by the time we're done the project will be worth 30% less. It just doesn't make sense. So there was never really all these reports were sort of written in fiction, in my opinion. And I thought, obviously, even for them to shift, I wrote this in my Substack actually a couple of weeks ago, but even for them to say 2019 levels of affordability, there's various measures of affordability. One is wages can go up. and that helps you afford a home. But the other thing is, if we just strictly focus on pricing, I think it's like John, I think national home prices would have to decline from the peak to 2019 levels. You'd have to just see about a 37% decline
From today?
from the peak.
Oh, from the peak.
But
Okay.
this
Yeah.
is like this is a national level index. I'm not
Mhm.
saying Toronto home prices dropped 30%. I'm
Yeah.
saying national home prices, the index would have to drop 37% from the peak, which I mean that would take you sort of in line with the US housing bust in 08, 09. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't even know if their index nationally dropped that much.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I don't think it did nationally. No.
I don't think it did. Like,
Yeah.
there's obviously pockets, right? Like the Sun Belt,
Yeah. 100.
for
Yeah.
example, dropped 30-40%. But on a national basis, that US home price index did not drop 37%.
Yeah.
And
No.
that certainly didn't spur more house building in those areas. That's something John and I have been tripped up on
Yeah.
for a long time. John, what are your observations? I mean, the idea that people were going to keep building at 30% drops was ridiculous. The
Well,
30%, I think in Ontario would have been the drop. What are your thoughts now? Like, you
I
know,
mean, this isn't surprising. I agree with Steve. I mean, this is obviously a disconnect from, maybe what the academics think how the world works versus how it does. You know what I mean? This is the yes in my backyard housing supply thesis that the builders are these benevolent people who are desperate to unleash supply, even in a market of falling prices, to lower house prices and rents for all of us. And the only reason they can't is because the cities don't allow them. Like, this is the academic thinking, right? Like, this is the theories that we've been hearing. It's illegal to build housing. They want to unleash supply to make homes affordable. And like this was what CMHC said. They want to unleash supply. They had triple completions. And the weird thing was that the report, the one that were published, I think 3 years ago, had they said, yes, tripling completions in an environment in falling prices is what we need to get back to affordability. Had they said, but this is impossible, this is insane, we need to lower population growth because obviously we can't triple housing completions in the short term, that report would have made a little bit more sense. You know what I mean? Because they're basically showing that the theory is impossible and we need some other ideas. But they didn't have other ideas. Their ideas were 1.2 million people per year, 1.3 population growth sustainable. We just need the triple housing completions in an environment of falling home prices. These are insane ideas. And this is the government agency responsible for housing affordability. So when housing is not affordable, it's because of these ideas. Like, this is why market's so broken. It's this idea that you can triple completions overnight.
So yeah, John, I think there's like 2 points in that, and like this would be like a good debate slash conversation here. But like one of the things from like the YIMBY crowd or the development crowd is like, oh, if we just sort of unlock, make it easier to build housing, we could ramp up. So like new like home completions, the record was what, 274,000, 200. Anyways, it's like 250,000 basically back in the 1970s. When we were running at like the peak of, like, say, call it home building, like 21, 22, like record units under construction, housing starts, like it was a bull market frenzy. Like there actually genuinely was a shortage of trades. So I'm not sure that there was really an ability, even through the immigration channel, to actually ramp that up significantly. So I think there was like there is like a natural cap on how much housing can be built. It still requires, obviously, again, private investment capital to build that housing. I think that's number one. I think what the YIMBY crowd probably, in my opinion, gets right is if you do make it easier to get permits and build housing, the free market can react much quicker to build that housing supply and limit the rate of growth. So I just look at markets like, obviously, I operate in Vancouver, but I also do some stuff in Calgary. And the ability of like the Alberta Calgary market to react to the housing market, that private sector moves really, really fast. So once home prices start rising double digits, like people just run in there and then they always, always, always overbuild. And that's exactly what they're doing now. Rents in Calgary are down 10% year over year. and there's a lot more in the pipeline because they can move really quick. But the problem is you get into Vancouver and it takes years and years to get these permits. And so it's like by the time you're able to actually put your shovel in the ground, it's like the bull market's almost over.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like I don't disagree with that. There's so much, it's such a barrier to build in Ontario and BC, I'm sure. So yes, that side of the argument is completely reasonable.
Yeah.
But this idea that we can triple completions, I think is where things
Yeah,
fall
I would agree.
apart. You know what I mean? And you're right.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, yes,
I
100%.
mean,
Fewer barriers to building, we all think is a good idea. No one thinks, increasing government barriers to building housing is a good thing. No one thinks that. Um, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think you and I share a lot of the same views. It's
I
it's
think
the
so.
but isn't the big problem that the math just doesn't add up? I mean, first of all, for all of Canada wanting to improve its completions, it stayed at 200,000 since the 90s,
Hmm.
right? So
yeah.
even if we had a population boom on that, why this flat line? Is there
Well,
no like construction innovation at all? Like that is a big question. Our
That's for sure.
immigration
Yeah.
issues. So does the prefab thing move anything? I don't know. The federal government's making a play. So question number one. Question number two is even in very elastic markets like Texas and other places, they're the places that boomed up the most and then fell spectacularly. It is not always true that housing affordability uh, necessarily follows when you have very elastic conditions for home building.
no, it does. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, okay, a few things on that. I mean, number one, even the CMHC report said one of the reasons they can't rapidly increase supply are constraints like labor, right? Obviously, that is a barrier. Secondly, we're building more condos, which take more time and are naturally take longer to build than low-rise homes. We're getting away from sprawl. But even when we do build low-rise homes, it needs sewers, it needs infrastructure. You can't just flip a switch and build 10,000 homes in the suburbs, right? And you're right. Even in markets that are supposedly the housing supply utopias of like Houston and Austin, prices have skyrocketed there, right? And yeah, they've had a population boom, but it's not like prices are not appreciating, which are the theories that CMHC is kind of pumping. If you just relax zoning, home prices will
Prices
stay
fall.
affordable. No, they may increase at a slightly lower rate, but they're still surging in Houston and Austin, right? So,
What's crazy is like I'm like you were asking me about like the home building productivity.
Mhm.
So there's like a very popular style of house in Vancouver. They're like it's all over the city. It's back from like the 1970s, 1980s era. It's called like the Vancouver Special.
I've
Sean
heard of it.
Fraser, yeah,
Yes,
Sean
yes.
Fraser, the former housing minister, would talk about like creating these housing catalogs so he could like create the next Vancouver Special, which is basically these houses went all up all over the city, single family dwelling units, and they were being like built in like 4 or 5 months. Like that was the timeline. People just up,
Are
done.
they those bungalows, Steve, with like a walkout kind of
No,
on
it's
the
it's like
bottom?
it's a two-story house. It's
It's a
usually it's like
two-story.
it's a slab on grade foundation with two
Okay.
stories, and like it's very generic, 3 bedrooms up, 2 bathrooms. Sort of downstairs has like a bedroom, sort of
Yes,
rec
but they can
room.
walk out because it's
Yeah, you
on
can walk
grade.
out.
and
Yeah,
there's no
Yes,
it's
yes.
basement.
very
There's no basement, which is very
Interesting.
different from Toronto.
yeah. So
That's very interesting.
those
So,
would be
and you
built and like they would slap those together like all across the city in like 4 months. And like there's no way you're doing that today in like less than 12. So I'm like, I think a lot of it too is just like you get sort of hung up on like you're waiting for like when you're installing like your hydro, you're waiting for BC Hydro now to like connect the power and the utility companies. And so like and then just going through the layers of bureaucracy.
can I be honest too? Is it also labor conditions? Were they as strong then?
Yeah, yeah. I think
Okay.
there's obviously way more like regulations
Yeah,
around like all the
I
city
worry a
inspectors.
little bit about the construction industry. It's obviously very good to protect your people, but
Hmm.
I have always wondered whether all associations in Canada, it doesn't matter what you are, professional engineer, doctor, builder, there's like a perverse incentive to allow a lot of new labor in. And I have always been a little bit
Hmm.
suspect about the fact that, we haven't been able to get new labor in to these markets. I don't want to, you know what I mean? I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, but there's a natural disincentive to see a lot of the wages fall across a lot of these professions that require like you have to have the qualifications to do these things.
Mhm.
And over the years, getting these qualifications has become tougher and tougher and tougher.
Well, I don't think like I don't know. I don't feel like young people really go into like the trades
No, yeah,
Yep.
they're not. But
right.
one other thing that Steve touched on, we got to remember is that, in the 70s, there was still a ton of land
Mm,
undeveloped for
true.
low-rise homes. So you can build tons of Vancouver specials and a lot of low-rise homes. Toronto's built up. There's no like vacant land in Toronto to be redeveloped into homes, into low-rise homes. That's why we're building condos, right? And there are maybe some in the outskirts as we're building subdivisions. But again, Ontario's trying to move away from that. We're trying to kind of solve our crisis with one fourplex at a time. And that obviously is harder than if you're building, thousands and thousands of low-rise homes in a new undeveloped parcel of land.
So
So,
Very good point.
OSFI's Peter Rutledge, the CEO of OSFI, the banking regulator. I don't know. He was on a podcast like maybe a year and a half, maybe a couple of years ago, and I remember just always stuck out to me, which is, I mean, it wasn't wrong. It wasn't like necessarily like a groundbreaking revelation, but basically that the future of Canadian housing was going like more European style. So it was moving away from like what we see in the United States, which was like the dream of like owning a single family house with a backyard, and becoming much more European in nature, which is like major density in urban cities, trying to sort of push people into the urban centers. And that's all going to go townhouse, condos. Like no one's building new single family houses anymore. And
And
mhm,
yet, my friend's father, who's an immigrant from Germany, had a really interesting observation on Canada Day that when we look out across Toronto, it is crazy how flat Toronto still is
mhm.
in wide, wide swaths of the city. This idea that we're shoving everyone in somewhere, it's rando. It's nothing like Europe. There's just a level. I don't know if it's a product mix, like the people don't like it. We're going to talk about sixplexes not being approved, but it is actually crazy how flat Toronto is after all this building.
It is.
I
But
think that,
this is a legacy of how Toronto was built 100 years ago, right?
And I
And
think our
yeah,
cultural tastes, like
yeah,
I'm not
100%.
sure that you're ever going to get everyone into a European model to your point, Steve. That may
yeah.
be
I
the
mean, I mean,
play.
I'm a huge lover personally of single family houses. I know the YIMBY crowd absolutely despises them, but I don't know. Call me old school traditional. I don't know. Just the idea of raising a family in a single family house and not a condo is appealing to me. But I think what's interesting is like the I think when you push to the outskirts, like at least like again, I look at like Vancouver and you push 35 minutes out. It's not a whole lot going on out there, right? I think if you look at like these European cities, it's like there's economic opportunity
The
in all
train
these.
networks,
Yeah,
every small city is a go still.
totally. Yeah.
It's totally developed on a different basis.
Totally.
Mhm.
Like once you leave like Vancouver city core, like and you go to these like suburban markets, like there's just not that much going on. Like it's
You
just
know what, Steve?
Uh,
When I get a chance, I'm going to write a book on this because I've always wondered why Australia has more little towns going than we
yeah.
do. I've never understood it. But
Vancouver's now trying to create them. Like we've got like
yeah,
Burnaby, we've got, now we're creating like Surrey, King George Hub, like around the stations. They're
yeah.
trying to create these new like second tier cities. But I still think they're just so far away.
But I don't think it's in the culture. Like a lot of
Yeah.
Australians will be from these places, they go to the city, they return. So, anyways, it's very interesting. Um,
but
but
this,
obviously, CMHC is not as curious as we are.
no.
It's like
But
they're not investigating why this line remains flat. They just
no.
keep issuing these reports,
Yeah,
Mhm.
100%. And
right?
to touch on what Steve said, he's 100% right. There's this shift to higher density. And I think this is why, even though I kind of am sometimes critical of the dynamic of investors playing in our housing market, they're not stupid. Anyone buying a low-rise single-family home, they're speculating on land, right? So they're not, and obviously I think it has negative side effects societally and as a country, but as an investment, it's actually not a stupid investment. Why would you buy an $800,000 condo as an investment? You can buy a $900,000 detached bungalow. Like that is going to outperform because you're investing in speculating on land, not on housing, and land is fixed in Toronto, right? So I don't blame them for these dynamics. This is a natural side effect of all of the policies that our governments have put forward. People just want to speculate on land.
So on to our next topic, also anecdotally, there was a time where the fourplexes, I heard people saying, well, if I have to buy a condo with my girlfriend, maybe I'll buy a fourplex or try to develop a property into a fourplex, move my mom into the basement or
Hmm.
into the granny flat. That's a better way to go because we'll be investing in a sense in a single family home,
Hmm.
even though it's a fourplex. But Toronto's take up of these fourplexes, John, has not been very good. And now the recent measure to allow sixplexes around the city was defeated in a large sections of that flat part of the city that I'm talking about.
Hmm. Yeah, so so fourplexes are legal in Toronto. They tried to push for sixplexes. It was not very popular with the inner suburbs of Toronto, Scarborough, Etobicoke, North York. So basically, the compromise was them to legalize sixplexes in sort of downtown Toronto, the old city Toronto, and East York, and in like one ward in Scarborough. Um, Listen, I don't even think it's the worst thing. I actually think fourplexes are better because the fourplexes are actually going to lead to and are leading to whoever's building them larger units, right? They're leading to 1,200 square foot, 2 to 3 bedroom apartments, one on each floor, right? Which I think is more of what the city wants, anyways. The second you try to ram in two more units in, they're just chopping them up into little 600 square foot
I have a
rentals.
question for you, John.
Yeah.
So on those sixplexes that they had proposed, anyways, was there a certain like land size requirement? Like, did you have to be a certain like frontage or certain square footage of the lot size
No, I
to
don't
put?
think so. No, because they allowed it on any, as far as I recall, like on any detached or semi-detached property, anything that's existing single family can build it. Like there are obviously some constraints on what you can build, like just
I guess
lot.
if I'm assuming like if I'm in Vancouver and the standard lot size is 33 by 122, so it's a 4,000 square foot lot. I don't see any way in hell that you're going to jam 6 units on a 4,000 square foot lot.
Yeah, it's a lot harder. So you're gonna jam, for example, um, you're basically gonna build up, say, 50% of the lot,
Hmm.
right? So I don't know, what is that, 2,000? How much you say?
That's three.
30?
Oh, that'd be yeah, 2,000 square feet. Call it
Yeah, 2,000
divided
square.
by
But
6 units.
so you know what they're probably going to do like 1,200 square foot per floor or something like that.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Per unit. It's tough to jam 6 units in there, right?
I don't even know how that'd be viable. I mean,
The
I know
only,
the indie crowd would maybe disagree with me, but like at the end of the day, I always look at it from the realtor's hat too, which is like I got to sell those 6 units. Can I
Yeah.
sell? Can I sell this really tight, awkward floor plans with no
So
parking?
yeah, so that's the problem in
Unlikely.
Toronto, I think, is like one of the things is that they're basically all being built as purpose-built rentals.
Hmm.
Because the weird thing is to make them so that you can sell them, you have to convert them to a condominium, which adds costs.
Right.
And it makes it harder for and there are some people who are doing it. I think that's a better model to, make them into small condos to sell. Because again, people want sort of longer term home ownership. It's kind of like a condo townhouse, effectively, right? Or a stack condo townhouse. But they're not doing that. They're basically just making them all into purpose built rentals, which is fine. They're very expensive to build. You know what I mean? And there's not a ton of uptake, as Urmi said. I mean, there is some, but it's a massive investment. You have like effectively now retail investors, kind of small investors dumping in, committing to projects that are going to cost them like 3.5 million bucks. And it's nothing like buying a tiny condo. Like these are assets you have to hold on to for the long term because multiplexes, they don't work like other houses. Like it's a relatively illiquid market. Like there's so many of these, multiplexes for sale in Toronto, and they're just sitting there. Like no one's buying them, right? because there aren't a ton of people who are looking to buy fourplexes and five. There are some, but not like, not an army of people the way there are to buy owner occupied homes. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out.
And moving to our next topic, from a former guest of ours, Mikhail Skuderud, who's a professor and really tracks Canada's population growth very well. We see a drop in Canada's population. So after somebody decided to just let everyone in, I guess everybody realized that wasn't a good idea. And McHale reports that from January 1st to April 1st, population growth, winter population growth in Canada is always slow. But this year it was especially slow, only 0.2% annualized, lowest on record and perhaps in Canada's history. And then I'm now putting on up on the screen a corollary to this. Canada's population standstill rattling Vancouver's housing industry. From the Vancouver Sun, with a cyclical downturn in big city real estate, the development industry is urging politicians to bring back domestic investors and foreign buyers.
I mean, that's not surprising. That's not
Bring them
surprising.
back.
Bring them back.
Bring them back. No, yeah, I mean it's interesting. It's interesting. I think that yeah, I've had a lot of conversations about this just on the development side and it's the development space is so bad right now that it's actually like a lot of them are actually on life support. And so then you start wondering about, city budgets that become so reliant on new development funding their revenue base. And yeah, it's interesting because basically what's happening here is the issue in the development space, and I'm sure it's similar in Toronto there, is if you're going to build, let's say you're going to build a new high-rise concrete tower in the city of Vancouver. I don't think you can build that and sell it for like less than like your break evens like on a high rise would be like, I don't know, some 1,300 a foot. So like obviously, to then make a profit, they're gonna want to sell these at say 1,500 a foot. But there's no bid at 1,500 a foot because the resale market is actually falling and the resale market's at like 1,100 a foot. So there's massive gap. And so the developers are like, well, how do we make our product more competitive to sort of try to close that gap? And I don't know that they necessarily can. I mean, hard costs are going to come down a little bit. I think cities are going to have to cut their development fees. So all of this will probably help a little bit. But I think they're like, well, the only people that are maybe dumb enough to pay the 1,500 a foot is the foreign buyer. But we implemented all these policies in a raging bull market, which is we implemented a foreign buyer tax and we implemented a foreign buyer ban. We have an empty homes tax. We have a BC speculation tax.
And we sent all the foreign students home.
Yeah, so we
The
have
rents
all
are
this.
falling.
We have all of this sort of taxes and demand side measures that were brought in during like raging bull markets, and now you've got like 20-year low bear market, and it's like, oh crap, maybe we should reverse some of these policies. I don't know. It's interesting. I'm glad I'm not in politics, but
No, I think it's also a case, no, John, of the dangers of using investor-led action to build a market. Like it's so volatile, isn't it?
Well, I mean, this is kind of one of the reasons I was against it. It's just fueled on hot air and speculation because in 2020 in Toronto, who was paying 1,500 a square foot for pre-con when you can buy a similar unit for 1,000 a square foot or 1,100 square foot? Like no rational person. It was all like speculation. You know what I mean? And I
And
think
people
this,
with capital they could afford to speculate with,
yeah, exactly.
right? Which we know there's capital looking for a home around the world.
Exactly. And
I'm just
listen,
wondering though, John, like how do you get like, okay, you take the speculative bubble out of it,
yeah.
but as like a condo developer, how do you get your costs down? Like, is there, from what I'm reading and gathering and the conversations I'm having, I don't think there's a whole lot of room for them to be delivering product at substantially lower prices.
No, I mean, well, I think they can at some point. Like some are going to just default on land, or any
Yeah.
land that's bought at today's prices is going to assume that they're selling at 1,200 a square foot, not 1,500 a square foot. The problem
Yeah.
is all these builders paid when they bought their land 4 years ago, they were expecting to sell at 15 or 17 or 1800 a square foot, right? Well, now that they
Yeah.
can't get it, anyone who's buying land is not paying, assuming they're going to get those prices, right?
So we need almost a cleansing. Like, does some of this land, unfortunately, bankruptcy, this happens with
Yeah, but this
firms
this happens in
consolidating, and
a
then
lot
you
of
return it back into
We're
the land
we're
back
seeing
into the
land
market.
prices down like in like the this Broadway corridor plan, which is like where the new subway line is going, and this is like the city's sort of next new big hub. And those land prices have come down 30 to 50% from the peak, right? So, but like even today, even with that 30% discount, I mean, it's still like the
yeah,
numbers
it's still
still don't
tight.
work. And
Yeah.
so, it's like, I guess, how much lower does the land price need to go? And obviously, you look at your construction prices, that's largely fed through commodity prices, which we don't control. So, I don't know. I just think that it's going to take years probably for that development community to recover to the point where the gap really narrows.
Yeah, but I think this is just a reminder, like, of, all business cycles are really led by housing cycles. You know what I mean? Like, this is the business. What was it? Edward, who wrote that paper? Edward Leamer, or one of like some of them, like the
Was
business
it a
cycle,
T was it
huh?
oh yeah that's
I think
there
it
was
was,
also
yeah, the business
yeah
cycle is a housing cycle, right? And
yeah
the point was it's exactly what we're experiencing now. When the economy slows down, people stop buying homes, new construction slows down, we start getting layoffs in construction, which has spillover effect. The economy weakens further. So, even though I said, like, yeah, maybe if we get a trade deal, the market might pick up a little bit. I think there's still a lot of negative economic news over the next 6 to 12 months. Like, a trade deal doesn't solve what's happening in the pre-construction housing market, right? Like, that's going to be sluggish unless people pivot and build purpose-built rental, which isn't easy to convert a condo to a purpose-built rental necessarily. The numbers still might not be there. Yeah, you're going to get softening. We're hearing about layoffs in new housing construction. So I do think there's going to be some challenges for sure over the next year.
All right. Well, I'm going to end on a quick little bombshell, which isn't really fair to you too, but I'm going to do it on our way out. Just to remind us that housing is a massive issue across Europe and the United States. I know a lot of us think, well, their per capita house prices are a lot lower, but it's very subjective. We've just seen a huge battle erupt in New York City over the Democratic nominee. And Mamdani has suggested rent freezes, very aggressive. And I'm putting up this headline: a potential Mamdani mayorship strikes fear in the real estate industry. The Democratic nominee has called for freezing the rent on 1 million apartments. And of course, we know that Donald Trump, famous developer of New York, has countered this by questioning maybe Mamdani's citizenship status. But I would like to point out that it seems like this issue, if we do move into this world where home ownership is less, rental market is higher, investors are relying on that.
Mhm.
It's not an easy discussion as we all think, right? Eventually, people will start to feel shut out and not want to play the game. Steve, you had a post here, you're retweeting Peter Thiel saying the amount of young people calling themselves socialists. Well, if you can't afford your basic needs, that's what makes you tip into the socialism department.
yeah
So I wonder if last thoughts on how much of a lightning rod we're seeing housing be across the developed world right now.
yeah I mean, yeah, to Peter Thiel's comment, I thought it was really interesting, right? Because he says, makes sense to be a socialist if you don't have any capital, right? And so I think that's where a lot of these Western democracies are. I mean, I find it interesting because everybody always talks about, Canadian housing and likes to compare it to the US. But I mean, if you look at the US, they had a crazy stat out. The median age of home buyers in the US is currently 56 years old. That's up 7 years. That's 7 years older than it was a year ago. The median age for first-time home buyers at a record high of 38 years old, right? So, I mean, yeah, Canada's I would say worse, but I mean, I don't think it's a lot better in other parts of the world as well. And this is sort of a recurring theme, and I think that's ultimately why I don't want to say you hope for it, but you're like, man, I feel like there's a high probability, and maybe it's for the best for society, is that you just have a period of stagnation in home prices where wages can slowly start to increase, and then you can have a modest improvement in housing affordability.
And I would argue, Steve, that we start to channel so much of that passive capital that's been parked in these industries
Yeah.
back into these other industries. Like if we're going to have AI, if we're going to have all these things, let's use it to improve healthcare, senior citizen care. Let's use all these robots to improve our lives, right,
Well,
John?
yeah, it's a self-fulfilling feedback loop, which
Yeah.
is like the more house prices go up, the more capital that it attracts, the more speculation it attracts, and it sort of feeds on itself. And I think that's all sort of unraveling now. Falling rents, falling home prices, higher savings rates at banks and other investments. And like, a lot of the common conversation I have today is, well, I think I should sell my investment condo. And like, I would have been better off putting it in the S&P, right? So like, I think it's a lot of that conversation today that people are just saying, well, maybe I can, redeploy my capital elsewhere. And I think if you have a period of stagnation, I continue to say this, I look at parts of the city in Vancouver that have already gone through 10 years of no growth. And so I don't think it's unreasonable to think that other parts of Vancouver, for example, or the GTA might go through a decade of stagnation as they did in the 80s and 90s there, John.
But John,
Yeah.
your argument has been if this isn't accompanied with some control, we can see more institutional investors and others move in.
I mean, well, for sure. I mean, I think especially those are risks with the housing market. You know what I mean? And, I did a video this week, using some stats from even Mike Moffat, who's constantly dismissing investors in the housing market, but he even showed that, in communities in Ontario where the number of homes that are owner occupied, 300 homes increases, more people have kids, which makes sense. But as the share of three-bedroom homes that are rental owned increases, meaning they're converted into rental properties, the share of children actually decreases. There's a negative correlation because people don't want to raise family in someone's rental property, right? So I think it has a huge issue. I mean, to your point, a lot of people do feel shut out. I mean, I don't know. Most people that I know are renting feel a little bit pissed off that they can't afford a home, that it's so expensive, that it's so unaffordable, and their rent's very expensive. So, I think how this is channeled, I think politically, I think largely depends on the leaders and you know what I mean, and who's giving the message that resonates with people. But I think it's a global issue. Like this is, I was just on a conference this morning, in with European policymakers that the exact same issues going on in many European countries, that we're seeing here, and how do they channel them, and how do they
I'm
uh,
just glad I'm not a policymaker because I think it's just
oh
such a
yeah.
complicated file. And obviously we had, we talked about it, we joked about it on, new housing minister, Mayor Gregor Robertson,
Oh yeah.
who had to slip up in week one saying, well, we don't think house prices should need to fall. I mean, your biggest voter base is still the boomer generation that owns all the houses and the assets. And
Apparently, he does.
Apparently,
What
it's a
is
pretty
that?
big real estate portfolio. So why
he
would he
Yeah.
does.
want
I'm not
prices
gonna
to
get into I
fall?
don't want to get into it, but there's another funny thing. It's just classic politician. Anyways,
Uh,
I'm not gonna get into it, but
no, I know. We got to leave
What?
Gregor alone this time, but maybe we'll
he's got more sort of abnormalities that don't correlate just to housing.
Oh
Really?
no.
Oh yeah.
All
I'll
right.
tell you off the air.
All right.
Oh no. All right. Well, on that note, happy Canada Day, everyone. We're still a great country. We need a lot of work, especially on our housing front. Thank you to John and Steve for being two voices that are really advancing that discussion across Canada. I hope that you'll join us a month's time for the roundtable. And of course, Move Smartly will be back with our new episode next week. You can reach John at John Pasalis on X Twitter and Steve at Steve Saretsky on X Twitter. And our show is at Move Smartly. Thank you, everyone.